We're at the point where God makes a covenant, an everlasting covenant, with Abram and his descendants. And we saw last time that Abram's faithfulness, Abram's commitment, whatever Abram does is in reaction to the unilateral covenant that God made with Abram and his descendants. And now it goes on and says, "This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you, and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised." Now God goes here on and says, I will cut something. Remember, we talked about that a covenant very often in the Old Testament is being cut. Also here will be a cutting, and it is painful. It's something very intimate. It changes something very crucial. The Bible talks about the circumcision of the lips, the circumcision of the ears or the heart. Anything uncircumcised in biblical understanding is unusable, or at least very difficult to use. The word to circumcise contains the root, in Hebrew means mul, and mul in Hebrew means also a counterpart. It signifies an image where two persons meet face to face, and in this case it is God that encounters Abram, meets him face to face in a very intimate, even embarrassing way. He says, "You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins. This shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you." Pay attention here. God always calls himself first and then Abram, and it shows how the covenant goes. Later on in this chapter, it is reported that Abram circumcised himself and his house, his son Ishmael, in one day. And it says here in Hebrew, it says, "Be'etzem hayom hazeh." Normally, it is translated at exactly that day. But in Hebrew, you can also hear that it says in the strength of the day, in the power of the day. That means what happens now, the circumcision, is not something you do in secret, you just do hidden away so nobody sees it because it's embarrassing. It's intimate, it's what you don't pull into the public. No, the Bible does not support in any way any secret doctrine or mysterious cult that just some people who are the inner circle understand. The Bible does something that is very open. And you may imagine what it meant for Abraham. "At the age of 8 days, every male among you shall be circumcised throughout your generations, whether born in your house or brought with you money from any foreigner who is not your offspring." Pay attention here. There is nobody to be in the household who is not circumcised. The Bible nowhere supports that a mix of religion lives in one house. "Surely be circumcised shall be both he who is born in your house and who is bought with your money. My covenant shall be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has violated my covenant." Let me tell you something about the practical side of circumcision. We don't just be people who preach the word. We want to practice it. I've brought here my circumcision instruments with me. You actually may find them anywhere here in this country. If you walk the country, you just find these sharp flint stones. And a few years ago, I met somebody who is actually an expert in, he's a kind of archaeologist, anthropologist who researches how people in earlier times lived here. And he makes the old weapons, the old tools ancient people did. And I asked him to give me something, and he actually in front of my eyes did this. that he cut a knife out of this stone. You know, he took another stone. I cannot do it, but I can show it to you. He simply hit with another stone, here this stone, and tried it several times until he had this knife. Now, this looks nice, and this looks also nice. They're not so usable, but you can have very sharp knives here. They're like a razor blade. And the amazing thing is, if you go practically into this issue, that already these ancient people, maybe even Abraham, knew that if you form such a knife, if you create such a knife freshly, it is sterile. It is ready, you don't have to touch it, except for the operation itself, but it's sterile. So they were already then in antiquities, they were on quite a high level with all the circumcision issue. We see that God here makes circumcision, the circumcision of the male foreskin, the sign of the covenant God makes with Abraham. Now, if there are voices today, especially in the Western world, who demand in different ways and with different arguments that the Jewish people must give up the land and the circumcision, then these voices actually call Jews to stop being Jews. Anyone who questions the Jewish claim to the land of Israel or labels circumcision as barbaric, in the end demands the people of Israel to annul this eternal and basic covenant that never ever was annulled or superseded by anything else. Let's be very careful here with our theology in looking at these things, but let's also be confident and remember that this is an everlasting covenant that was not made by Abraham or Sarah or any other people who had an imagination. This covenant was made by the living God himself, and he is the one who committed himself to this covenant as an everlasting covenant.